download this episode. If you're listening to it, just listening to it. That helps our rankings on the Apple charts, which we were number one. And what was it, Antigua?
I heard
We
we're
were
number.
number one to go, but we were number one. I forgot it was like Antigua, and
Tigua's
yeah, I mean
nice.
that's pretty good. Um, so on, I guess was it 12 days to the election, but
Yeah.
who's counting?
We found out
Um,
that the president is definitely a Nazi. He doesn't even deny it at this point.
and
Um,
literally has no effect on anything.
yeah.
People are
Well,
just like, yeah, whatever. I like him. I think he's funny. I like his policies. He's a Nazi. His chief of staff said he's a Nazi. I like his policies. His policies of being a Nazi. Yeah.
yeah. And I was reading recently that he's going to go after like health insurance again. I'm on this Obamacare, whatever, and I like it, but like, I almost would be willing to give it up just to make these guys all fucking eat their own fucking hats. All these people who voted for him, and then they just lose their health insurance.
Yeah. I listen to a lot of media, and and then and I watch what's going on.
Yeah.
It's kind of, and it's, you're just like, how the fuck is this?
Yeah.
Um,
I still think she's in a
what?
good position. Like I said, I think last time that they're doing this thing, these right wing polls, they're flooding the zone with all these right wing polls, and they did the exact thing in 22. That's why we thought we were going to get massacred, the Democrats, and they're
Yeah,
they're doing it for a few reasons. I mean, one, I guess they want to keep the momentum going, and two, if she wins, then they can. This is something they can use to call bullshit on because we were up in the polls.
that's
Yeah,
I think that's the main thing, is they're kind
yeah,
of getting ready for the aftermath, because they're so confident. Like they basically are acting like they're going to win. So it's kind of like, and the ones in that ecosystem and bubble, they're just believing it. You know what I
yeah.
mean? They don't have any doubt. So they're all just going to lose their minds, because that's how they're being groomed to be like, well, I mean, there's no way. I mean, how could he have lost?
Yeah.
What the Nazi thing? What, people don't like that? I mean, I
Yeah,
think it's funny that like this time he didn't even try and run a campaign to like
yeah.
win.
Well, I was
You,
watching Lawrence O'Donnell. He said something good because this guy John Kelly, his respected general and chief of whatever staff, said that he was saying nice things about Hitler. Trump was saying nice things about Hitler. He wanted German generals, and then he writes some posts just shitting on John Kelly, but he didn't deny that he said those things. And Lawrence
right,
O'Donnell had a good point. He goes, he's not going to say he hates Nazis, not at this point, because there's a very small sliver of his voting
his base. Yeah,
base. Yeah,
totally.
that you can't say that. Imagine that. Jesus Christ.
You can't denounce Nazis, but John Kelly is a degenerate
Right. And
and a sick person.
Lawrence, and he's like, I wish I had German generals like in World War II. And Lawrence O'Donnell goes, those generals sucked. The good generals were Patton and fucking Eisenhower. Why don't you just say that?
Well, also I felt like, didn't they lose? Didn't it not end that well
Yeah,
for
I
Hitler? Like, I
know.
know he had a run, but I mean, it didn't end great. But I
Yeah.
guess
Plus, they all try to assassinate him too. His generals.
um,
He just
it
doesn't
is
know
funny
about history.
because he doesn't know, he doesn't care. And I think a part of him likes that he's going to be remembered forever as like Hitler. I think he likes that. I think he
Yeah,
wants to be, that's the vanity of it. He just wants to be known. As long as you're remembered, that's all that matters.
I think this is what Kamala should do. Is like they say he's gonna like say he won on election day. She should just say it before him. She should say it like in the morning. You know.
I think he already said it today. Why does he even wait for election day? Why does he? The other thing is, like, it already kind of feels like we are living in, an authoritarian regime, because the fact that we're all already have the foresight, we're all just anticipating that's what he's going to do. Like,
Yeah.
well, just like every year, every time he's just going to say he won. And that isn't that basically what they do in like Russia and, Hungary, where they're just like, Venezuela, I won. And then, but they can't do anything about it. So he's clearly going to do that. But it's the normalization of that is like scary, where it's just like, well, he's just going to do that again, of course, like,
Mhm.
because he's crazy and no one's going to question it. So
just wish we could.
I'm today I got really kind of I got a lot of anxiety just because
Yeah, me too.
um have you as it's gotten closer like
Yeah, I mean, look, I feel like she's going to win, but I'm not 100%, you know, and they're doing all
I'm
these
not
things.
either.
They're
It's
they're doing all these
terrifying.
things to try to cheat, but they're getting slapped down in all these different places. They're filing lawsuits and all these, but all their lawsuits are just to stop people from voting.
They were playing that Tucker Carlson clip. Did you hear that where he's at like a rally and he's giving this weird, well obviously it's him so it's a weird speech where he's like, you know, this country needs, you can't just let your kids, run the house and, smoke joints at breakfast. I don't know what the fuck he thinks is going on in people's houses. And he's like,
Right.
and there's a time where daddy has to come home and be like,
Oh yeah,
you've
that
been a
that.
bad little girl and you're going to get a spanking. And it's just like, it's so weird and creepy. And they all go nuts. I understand like owning the libs because you hate them, but there's so much anger. And I know it's kind of been normalized and they've kind of been groomed into it. But
But it's just
what are they
tribalism.
so mad
It's
about?
tribal. They're just no. They just want to win. They're treating it like a sporting event. Even if
Yeah.
Trump does every horrible thing to them, it doesn't matter. He won. That was their guy.
Yeah. I guess
So
the anger is what's so like
uh,
confounding. It's
yeah.
just
Oh,
like,
but and by the way, the John Kelly thing. He's John Kelly. He was like, Trump is a danger. He's a fascist. Hitler, and they go, well, who are you endorsing? He's like, I'm not endorsing anybody right now. I'm like, what the fuck, man?
yeah, I know. I don't want to talk about that.
I mean, the only way you could
I'm
stop
not
him from winning is endorsing the other one, right? And voting for the
right.
other one. So I don't know what
He's
you like.
undecided.
Yeah.
I'm still undecided. The other one, it's the end of the country and the end of democracy, and Putin's going to take over the world. But I'm not sure.
Right. I
I
mean,
like his
maybe
policies.
he's saying just don't vote, but like people want to go vote. So just tell them to vote for the person who's not him, and who will
Yeah,
be
that's
him.
the thing. It's so fascinating at this point. Like at this point, how far in it is, and it's just kind of like, well, I don't want to endorse anybody, because that
Yeah.
would be too much. What's really scary is like, he seems like he's deteriorating mentally and just physically, and
Yeah.
I don't think he's really going to have the stamina to really get through it. But it doesn't matter because he's literally just like a puppet for all these Project 2025 people. They're all going to be the one, all the crazies
Oh,
like Stephen Miller and fucking
yeah. I mean, if they get,
Lewandowski.
it's a good chance they could get all of Congress. Then it'll be like the first 2 years of Trump.
So our guest is a New York Times bestselling author. She's written a whole bunch of books, including one you may have heard of, the Nanny Diaries, Citizen Girl, Nanny Returns, and she has a book coming out called The Best We Could Hope For. Please welcome our guest, Nicola. Am I saying it right? Nicola Kraus.
Nicola, yes, yes, you are. It was the strange pronunciation my parents chose.
Do people pronounce it wrong all the time?
Oh, all the time, all the time. I did a podcast yesterday where they kept saying Nicola, Nicola. What do you think of this? And I was like, that's fine. I didn't correct
Don't they
myself.
pronounce it sometimes Kamala? Sometimes I think they screw that up. I'm joking.
I feel for her. It's hard. It's hard when you're not named Stacy.
I think what obviously you probably know it mentally when you see Nicol, you're going in with Nicole, and then it does like
Totally.
a left turn at the end. You're like, oh, Nicola, like
It's amused
Ricola.
my parents my entire life that it was mispronounced. They
What
could not
was
understand.
that like? Was that a family name, or why not just Nicole?
Thank you. That's a great question. My dad is British. So in England, it's Nicola. It's a totally normal name. They just forgot where they were living.
Okay, that happens. I have that same problem. My name Tom.
The tough one. People
people
screw that one up a
always
lot.
people always call me Nicola. So I have a lot of questions. I'm a really, I read the Nanny Diaries when it came out, and I'm a huge fan. Um, so you grew up in New York City, right?
Yes,
And you went to Chapin.
I did.
And my sister went there. I think when I first messaged you, I told you but she graduated, I think, like 10 years before you. So did you go there all the way through?
I did K through 12. Only 32 of us were left by senior year.
What was that like?
I loved it. I was really lucky. For those of you listening who don't know what Chapin is, it's an Upper East Side elite private school. Jacqueline Onassis went there, Sigourney Weaver when she was Susie Weaver.
Oh.
And I was incredibly lucky in that my class were weirdos. Like we were the Muppets. And above us, you had girls who graduated and became lawyers, doctors, decorators, housewives, and same thing below us. And we're almost all artists.
Really?
So
Oh,
the
you're
school really had not seen anything like us coming or going.
That's wow. Why do you think that? Was that just something that naturally happened, or is this kind of a random occurrence?
Yeah. Some strange lunar alignment that the class of 74 were just nutballs. Every year, the juniors were supposed to throw the winter carnival with themes like Santa's workshop, you know, Christmas
Right.
snowflakes. And we did Christmas at Graceland. So we covered the whole gymnasium in fake fur. My best friend wore silk pajamas and giant sideburns, and I went as Priscilla in a big black wig. And the school did not know what to do with us.
Wow. And did you? So did you want to be a writer when you were like going there? Were you like, oh, I want to write, or do you always want to write? Or
I was always writing from third grade on. I was always in those little literary magazines, which your sister might also have done. And the teachers were incredibly encouraging. But my mother was a librarian and my father was a bookseller. So to me, it was like I would be an astronaut. I just held books in such high self-esteem, not self-esteem, esteem, that it it seemed impossible. That was just not something that I was going to be able to do. However,
wait,
I
why?
did want to be an actor.
Because he worked in that industry, like selling books. So it seemed kind of like
It just seemed like a really lofty ambition. I think, when you go to a school like Chapin, to you, a book is Toni Morrison, it's Chekhov. It's not something that someone in a little kilt marching back and forth to school in Doc Martens is going to be able to pull off.
yeah.
I don't know why I had that limited sense of what literature was, but honestly, it wasn't until Bridget Jones's Diary, which I read a couple of years before it was published in the United States, that I thought, oh, you can just talk about your inner world and people will find that entertaining. And that had never occurred to me
Wait,
before.
was that so Bridget Jones's Diary was the one that showed you that? Had you read it? Like, did you read, Catcher in the Rye when you were there? And
Of course,
when
yes,
when you
but
when
I
you
don't.
read that, did you think like, because I read Catcher in the Rye, and when I got a little older, I was like, well, I could, obviously I was very like naive, but I was like, I could write like this, like
That, and I wonder if more guys feel that way, Holden being male. Uh, no, I was totally in awe of that book. I was in awe of all of his, Franny and Zoe and Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenters. And no, I never read those books and thought, oh yeah, I
yeah.
could totally do that.
Well, looking back, I probably shouldn't have thought that
Yeah.
when I read
Well,
Catcher
we
in the Rye.
should. We
I don't
should
think
read
I don't
that.
think I could write hop on pop. I don't even think I could do that. Well, wait,
Yeah,
wait.
when I
So, well, your mom was a librarian, though, you said? So did
Mhm.
she ever test you on the Dewey Decimal System? Do they still
Thank
even have the
God,
Dewey
no. They do. Librarians are still big fans. But every time that we would ask her a question, her answer was always look it up.
And this
that's
was,
fun.
and for our young listeners, before Google, you'd actually have to like go and get a book and like look in the book. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Now you don't even need your mom to tell you look it up. You're like, I'm just going to look that up right now. But
we
yeah, that
we
is
finally protested. Sorry, go ahead.
so when you I was reading something about your bio that did you originally want to be an actress?
Yes,
And
because that seemed practical and attainable.
I know which is it oddly does, right? But then when you I don't know what your experience of it was, but when you started pursuing it, were you like, oh, this is like the hardest thing in the world to do?
I think I always knew it was going to be hard. I didn't know that it was going to be brutal, violent, soul crushing. I could have finished the sentence that way, but for whatever reason, I was just a little bit delusional, which I think you have to be. You have to be a little bit delusional to pursue anything creative. I graduated college a year early to throw
Wow.
myself into it. And I was lucky enough that by the last year that I did it, and I was 24, so I hit it and quit it. But I was making enough money that I didn't need to nanny anymore. I was no longer cocktail waitressing or any of the other miserable things. And I was able to be immersed enough to realize it was not a good use of my time on the planet. And now, with the framing of Me Too, it's a very easy shorthand to describe why it was perpetually disgusting.
Wait, so you were making a living in it like that early?
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's great.
I was the voice of, I forget if it was a pear or an apple, for a New Jersey supermarket chain. I had a recurring under five on As the World Turns. I mean, I wasn't making mortgage money, but I was making
Wow.
24-year-old drink money. Um, and I just got tired of talking about my weight or getting feedback about it. And everything I was doing just seemed stupid.
Yeah, I think that's the whole point of it. Yeah, it's a very kind of stupid industry, I think. But when did you decide to when you went to NYU, right?
Yes,
Was it there that you first maybe thought that's where you met Emma McLaughlin?
yes.
And is that
She and
where you had thought about writing for the first time?
I it was the first time that I took a creative writing class because I tried to take one at the first college that I attended and I didn't get in. And I was told to my face by the head of the creative writing department that I did not have what it took.
Hmm.
And I thought, interesting. Fine. I came from this model, as you know. I don't have what it takes to be Toni Morrison. Fine. But I don't have what it takes to learn. I don't have what it takes to get better at this. Maybe I'm at the wrong school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's rough to hear.
Yeah.
Um, and then when you did you meet her in that class that you finally took at the other school?
No, she didn't take any creative writing. We met at a school called Gallatin, which actually was just becoming a school when we were there. Before that, I think it was just a department. And it's called the School Without Walls. So you make your own major. And we both transferred in. We were both doing arts and education. So she was working with a population of at risk children to teach them theater skills as a tool for cooperation and collaboration. And I was primarily working with kids on the autism spectrum. So, same idea. They would develop self confidence and learn how to connect better with other kids.
And is that
It was
where were you nannying at that point?
Yes. So I was nannying full time on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, plus nights, and then going to school on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
And how did you get into nannying? I'm just kidding. Did it was it something you pursued or did it just kind of happen?
When I was 13, I asked my mother for the Flashdance soundtrack, and she said, get a job.
Wow.
And so I put myself on the Chapin babysitting board, and a career was born.
Wait, you at 13 you asked for the Flashdance soundtrack?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was that
Now
was
think
that
about if you were around today, because you would have, if your mom said get a job, you could have just downloaded the whole thing for free, like online, and
Right.
you would never have been a nanny.
Right. And my whole career never would have happened.
I know, and the Nanny Diaries might never have came to be. But what so when you was that well after Flashdance had been a thing when you had wanted the soundtrack?
No, it was square on there. So, like, seventh grade, I think,
Yeah. It would
87, or did the movie come out a couple of years before
it
so
that?
would have been
interesting.
it would have been weird if it was like 2019. That would have been weird.
And your mom was like, get a job.
Get a job.
Um, so interesting bit of trivia from that is when I was in sixth grade, I grew up in Manhattan and I went to this public school and this dancer named Jacques D'Amboise would go around to schools and he would like teach kids dance. And if he thought you were like, you kind of had like maybe some skill for dance, he would choose you to be in this special thing, there was like advanced class. And I was in that. And one day he was like, oh, we're going to go to the Oscars and they want us to dance to What a Feeling from Flashdance on the
Wow, it all comes
Oscars.
around.
So around that time when you were asking me that, I was on the Oscars dancing to that song the What a Feeling song.
Wow.
I
So cool.
know it's my big story.
I wish I had a
It's a great
Flashdance
song.
story. I have no Flashdance story. I feel left out of
It's
this.
not too late. You can still
Yeah.
get one.
You can tell this one if you want.
I'm gonna ask my
Um,
mom if I can get the soundtrack. Maybe that'll
yeah,
start
yeah.
things up for me.
So okay, so you meet Emma McLaughlin, and you're she was an Annie too, right?
Yes. We were taking a class together called Gender and Performance, which was a festival of enraged nonsense. And she was the only person making any sense. So I followed her to the elevator every Tuesday and Thursday, and I never got up the courage to talk to her. And then I graduated. And I ran into her at the Citibank at the corner of 86th and Lexington. And we realized that we were both out of cash. We were both nannies, and we both went to the same school.
Uh,
2 days later, the family she was living with told her they were getting a divorce and could she please be out by the next morning. She called me crying. I said, my sister's away for the summer. You want to come move in with us? And
Wow.
so we went from not really knowing each other to sharing a bathroom in 48
And
hours.
then were you both? When did the idea for you collaborating to write something about nannying? When did that come take shape?
About 5 years later, so
Oh,
fast
okay.
forward, I'm hating acting. Emma is doing something called organizational development, so like very high level HR. And I have decided that the way out of what I'm doing is just to say yes to everything. So I was looking into taking my pre-med prereqs. So going back to Hunter and doing that, I was teaching yoga and I was writing. And I thought one of these three things is going to lead me out of this misery. And I wrote a play. I invited Emma to a reading of it, and she sent me an email the next day and said, I have this idea that we should write a book about nannying. Do you want to do it with me? And I thought, that is a terrible idea. Nannying was miserable, but I'm saying yes to everything. So let's do it.
Really, you thought it was a terrible idea?
I thought it was a terrible idea. Nannying almost broke both of us. We both left the job heartbroken.
I
Re-
have a question. What's the difference between a nanny and an au pair?
That is an excellent question.
Wow.
So, an au pair typically lives with you and is paid a significantly lower rate because there's
Oh.
some premise of a cultural exchange and housing. So, if you have the space, it can be a very cost effective way to get childcare.
Oh, that's why there's a lot of foreigners who kind of come over and do that, right? Okay,
Yes.
that makes sense. Okay.
um, but it when you were nannying, did it become first of all, like I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, but how much of your experience is actually reflected in the book, the Nanny Diaries? Is it pretty right on?
We were two people who had worked for a range of families. So certainly there were certain truths once we started to compare our experience. And I think that's what gave us the conviction to write the book in the first place. Once we understood that there was really a pattern that was worth calling into question. But it is a novel. We made Greer a little boy because otherwise we would have had a pronoun problem in every scene.
Oh, interesting.
We worked for families where primarily it was just depressing. I mean, white collar child neglect is depressing. But because of the playdate system, we were both inside just banana situations all the time. And we were constantly denigrated, disrespected, underpaid, undervalued. And in the middle of it, there was this tiny little person who just desperately wanted to be loved. So it felt like it was
Yeah.
worth talking about.
Um, one of the themes that seemed to repeat itself in all your experiences, was it that there were just a lot of rich families who didn't really have a lot of time and didn't really want to be around their child or couldn't be around it and just kind of pawned it off on you? And
It
that
was
happened, that could happen consistently.
consistently. There was this repeating pattern that would happen to me semester after semester where a woman would bring me in saying, I just need someone 1 or 2 afternoons a week. And within weeks, I was there 3 days a week, every night. I'd find out that they had a full time person on the weekends. And I realized this woman spent absolutely no time with her children. At the time, prenups were very closely tied with producing a kid. So whether or not these women actually wanted to have children in order to cement their place in the household or in the alimony pecking order, they needed to produce a kid.
Hmm.
And this poor child never asked for that. Like they just wanted to have a normal childhood.
And what's it like when you're forming a bond with this child and then maybe you get fired? I mean, that must get really
That's the
difficult too,
heartbreaking
right?
part. Yeah. I mean, my last job, I cried for months, like I'd been
Mm.
dumped. I mean, just heartbroken. I still Google that kid sometimes, and they're doing fantastically, and I'm thrilled. But and they
Right.
do not remember me. I am Bing Bong. But it's
Was there one question I
difficult.
really have also is, were you worried when you guys were writing it that people were going to get mad and like sue you?
I never was. Emma was concerned. My perspective was if people could recognize their bad behavior, they wouldn't have done this in the first place. So no, we never heard from anybody.
Really?
And you called people Mr. and Mrs. X, right? In the book and the movie, right?
Yes.
Was that deliberate because
Yes.
of this kind of stuff?
Yes, and also I think we wanted to really drive home that this was not made up, that people did really behave this badly. And so by adding the veil of veracity around it, I think it helped to heighten that message to the reader.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny hearing you say talk about it because when I read it, I just assumed like, well, this is probably not completely. I know they worked as nannies, but I'm sure that it's pretty hyperbolic. But
I
It
I
don't.
was satire. We had to heighten things. There's a joke about a sleepover for preschoolers at Gracie Mansion. But in terms of the extremity of the disrespect, that isn't satirized.
was it just is it almost kind of like being, you always hear the trope of like people who are personal assistants in Hollywood and how they just kind of treat them a certain way. Was it
Yeah.
maybe sort of similar to that?
Very similar. We had a lot of friends who were working as personal assistants at that time. It was a very popular job for friends of mine who graduated from NYU and wanted to go into entertainment. And yeah, they were getting shoes thrown at them
Wow.
and witnessing all sorts of. I had a friend who worked for a very famous person, and her job was just to carry a bottle of Heinz ketchup with her at all times.
Hmm.
All times.
Okay. That seems logical.
I don't want to get too ahead, but maybe because like when you're writing the book, obviously it was turned into a movie. Those actors that were cast in those roles, were you thinking of like actors like that who were going to be in those roles when you were writing the book? Laura Linney or something
We
like that?
we weren't thinking of Laura Linney yet. I think just because of the timing of it. We did cast the book as we were writing it in a way that we never did subsequently, only because we'd never written together before and we needed to be picturing the same person. So I don't remember who we chose for Mrs. X, but in the novel, she's Irish. So she's very, very pale with very dark black hair. So no, I don't think we were picturing Laura Linney. However, we did go to a very early advanced screening of Lost in Translation, and we were just both immediately so in love with Scarlett.
Mm.
And we went to the party afterward, and normally we chat and we mingle. We couldn't even speak to anyone. We were just sitting in the corner, both in the stunned love. Like, that's Nanny. She's
Yeah.
Nanny.
I had a similar experience when I
And
saw Lost in Translation.
we're like, she
What
needs to play me in the movie of my life.
Wait, wait. So yeah,
Whatever
I want
happened
to
to
address
Scarlett
that a
Johansson,
little
by the
bit.
way? Whatever happened to Scarlett Johansson? She kind of it was like a
I
one-hit
know,
wonder.
right?
It's your movie and that was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was when you're writing it, and you said you were kind of like, oh, this is a terrible idea, but I'm saying yes to everything. Did you have a sense of like, I'll just do this and it's going to go nowhere, or what were you thinking of the prospects of it?
And initially, it just seemed like a good project. And I love a good project. I love homework. And we met for the first time to talk about the interview. We thought that would be a great place to begin. And she told me her memories, and I told her my memories, and we realized that they matched. And we created an outline. So she would do the arrival in the front hall, and I would do the part in the living room, and she'd do the tour of the apartment. And she emailed me her pieces during the week. And all I did was line them up. They've never been edited. And that is exactly what is published in the book.
Oh,
And
wow.
I
Really?
can't tell where her voice stops and my voice starts. And I was the first person to read it, to assembled, and I immediately got chills. Oh, this is what I've been waiting 4 years to feel. And so we got an agent very quickly. I set my headshots on fire really quickly. I was all in, and we worked really hard, but the book just had a momentum of its own. We sold
Did
the
you,
film rights before it had even come out.
Oh, you
so
did? Really? Interesting.
you got interest for it pretty fast.
Yes.
Yeah, I always wonder how that works.
Interestingly,
You
what
said
it
you sold it before it even came out. How does that happen? They just know about the book? I know that happens a lot sometimes. Or not a lot, but
I will get to that. First, I will just say for anyone out there aspiring to do anything, when the manuscript went out for auction, and it wasn't the complete manuscript, it was 2 chapters and a 26-page outline.
oh, okay.
8 houses passed and didn't just pass, but told us to drop dead, and only one bid. So St. Martin's bid against themselves. And getting rejected is no measure of whether something is going to find an audience.
Right. So really people were that vitriolic, some people in their
Oh, yes.
rejection?
I have
Why?
kids at that school. We're like, what school? There's no school named in the proposal. Just the idea that nannies would have the temerity to tell their story was enraging.
Was it kind of like, oh, this is going to be some like nanny tell all, like to like
Yeah.
take people down?
Probably scare a lot of
Yeah.
people there.
And you were like, yeah, but we're not going to say your names.
No, and it that wasn't the intention. It's a funny book, and we wanted to entertain people. And thankfully, one editor got it.
Um, and this is another I just want to. So, what was it like when like collaborating? Like, had you ever done that, or what's that? How does that work? Do you what does one person write something and then send it to the other person, or
We both had theater backgrounds, which I think was incredibly helpful. So we came from an improv background, yes, and we were both willing to hear each other out, and we knew that something could be better for both of our input. We certainly had disagreements all the time, but we rapidly learned that if person one doesn't understand what person two is trying to go for, person two has to say the whole thing again. And what will happen is either person two will say it in a way that person one gets it finally, or in the process of explaining it, you go, oh, no, wait, that's a really stupid idea. I don't even know why I said that. Either way, by the time person two has pitched the whole thing a second time, the conflict is resolved.
and did you find yourself falling into like a pattern like pretty quickly, or did it? How was it? Was it something that seemed simpatico pretty quick?
We were on sort of a bonkers schedule because Emma is a night owl and I'm a morning person, and she was still working full time at a.com.
Oh, wow.
So she would start working every night around midnight. She would send me her pieces by around 3 a.m. I would get up at 6 a.m. Macs and PCs were not compatible then. So I would retype everything she'd sent me
Oh,
into a
God.
Word doc, and then I would start my day. She would have the next installment by the time she sat down at midnight, and around the clock we went.
And how long did it take to write the first draft?
About 4 months because it was all that we were doing. And then the second draft took us another 4 months to just, and we read it. We would change a sentence and read it back from the top.
Wow.
Probably read it somewhere between 75 and 100 times.
And when it finally when it came out, were you kind of was there anticipation, or were you kind of like, yeah, this will probably come out, and if some people buy it, that'll be cool.
We had really no idea what was about to happen. We knew that we'd sold the film rights. We knew that we'd sold the UK rights. It actually came out in the UK first. So we had some sense that there was this bubbling excitement. And we were on the Today Show the morning that it came out. And we went to breakfast, and then we went to Barnes and Noble on Third Avenue, and we
Huh.
walked in and said, "Hi, do you have any copies of the Nanny Diaries?" And this guy said to us, "No, all right, like they're all gone, but we're getting more." He said,
Oh, that's a
"You
good
had
sign.
some, and someone bought them?" And he said, "Yeah, we had 40 copies." 40. I was like, "Okay, well, you know, like 15 people, and I know like some of those people are strangers." And we couldn't believe it. And the sweet thing is, 15 years later, we were doing an event at the Barnes and Noble on 86th and 3rd. And the
Oh,
manager now said, I was the guy when you guys came in on sale date and could not believe you'd sold your book to someone you didn't know.
wow.
We're like, oh my
Wow.
God, we love you. We gave him a huge hug.
Yeah,
Was
I,
it
We were
also
there for that
I think that
amazing
Barnes and
moment.
Noble's not there anymore, which is I think what they've.
No, no, it moved like 2 blocks up now.
Oh, really? Oh, good. It's
Yeah,
still
yeah.
around.
It's like 88th and 3rd now,
did
where
they have
Pier
to
1
move
was.
because they'd sold so many copies of your book?
They sold so many copies of our
They had
book.
to open a bigger space. So what was so after that? I mean, it became this New York Times bestseller, right? So what was that experience like? Was it just kind of overwhelming, or what was?
It was profoundly overwhelming in a way that subsequently I'm grateful for because it helped me really understand a lot about the science of success or the neuroscience of success. Because I think that the reason that so many celebrities overconsume is that the experience of success is just cortisol. It is just morning to night cortisol, and then taking something so you can finally get to sleep. Your body doesn't know the difference between the red carpet and getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger. So you're constantly looking for what is the thing? Is it a cupcake? Is it a nap? Like, how am I going to actually feel like I'm accomplishing something and not just feel terrified all the time?
Wait, so it's
You're on
cortisol, really?
television every day. It's cortisol.
It's traumatic, really? It's not like
It's adrenaline. If you get up every morning at 4 in the morning to get your hair done, to be on TV, to get on a plane, to fly to the next place, to do the local news, to do the local newspaper, and also at every turn, people are asking you what we would now call like kind of gotcha questions, or they just really want you to finally say the names of the people you worked for, and you just can't. So you're in this strange sort of adversarial situation, but you want to make a great 3 minute segment and you want everyone to have a good time, you leave that just drenched, and if you're doing that for 6 straight months, which is really, really unusual for a book. So we were excited, overwhelmed, incredibly grateful. The whole time, my mom was also in the hospital. So I was like zipping back and forth between two very different paradigms. And we were just kind of wrung out. I think it was only when that was all over that we could look back and go, oh my God, that was amazing.
also is it confusing at the time because most people's perception of like you know when they start a project or it's creative, you're kind of like, well, if this is successful and I get accolades, then my life is just going to be perfect and great. So is
Yeah.
it weird when it happens and you're like, oh, this isn't very comfortable?
Oh, yes, it's really confusing. And we were 27. Uh, it was easier when we got older, and one, we just had so much more experience. But I think being married, having kids, sort of remembering that it's lovely. Like, what's actually important is connecting with your audience or just a single reader. Do you know the musical title of Show? There's a
uh
great song in it
no, no.
called "I'd rather be 9 people's favorite thing than 100 people's ninth favorite thing." And it took us a long time to realize that what mattered was that connection with people. And the rest of it is just, feeding the gaping maw of the media. It's
Right,
sort of
right.
nonsense.
And when the movie came out, what, a few years later, right?
But 5 years later, because it got stuck in the divorce lawsuit between Miramax and Disney. And it was the title that both sides were fighting over. And then we stayed with Miramax, uh, the new iteration of that, right as Harvey was just setting himself on fire. So we're like, oh my God, our book is in the trunk of the flaming car and we can't get it out. So we just had to sit on the sidelines, but we were lucky years after seeing Lost in Translation, after so many other actresses were attached, it came back around to Scarlett. So we got our dream girl,
Were
but we
you
had
were
to
you
be
pretty
very
involved?
patient.
Were you pretty involved
Not at
the
all. Not
adaptation?
after in the second iteration when Harvey fired the producer off of it who delivered Cider House Rules for him. He alienated the entire cast. he alienated the
Really?
director
He seems
and
so easy to work with from what
Yeah,
I've
I'm gonna say
heard.
this
right,
right now.
everyone loves him.
Harvey Weinstein's not a nice guy. I'm gonna say it. I don't care who I offend. I'm gonna.
It's really weird too, because I feel like, Harvey Weinstein would really connect with, a story about a young nanny.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? I mean, God bless he got it, and selling the film rights a year out helped us tremendously. But I when we sold the rights, I said, great, I just have one condition. I don't ever want to be in the same room with him.
Did you ever have to encounter him at all, or?
No,
Okay,
no, we never had to meet him.
that's good.
I think Gwyneth Paltrow had the same deal with him too. I think something like that. She didn't want to be in the same room with him.
I think his wife had that deal too. She doesn't want to be in the same room with him.
Yeah.
What?
God bless.
Was that surreal when a movie's coming out and Scarlett Johansson? Because people always do that game of like, well, who would play you in the movie of your life? And then when they were like, well, Scarlett Johansson is playing me, was that kind of what's
Oh,
that like?
that was so deeply surreal. Emma and I, the first time we saw it, we just cried because it was like someone had made a movie of our dreams. It was so dissociative. And I now get like a big rush of warm fuzzies every time I watch Only Murders in the Building because Matteo Borghese did all of the set design for Nanny Diaries. And
Oh,
now he's an executive producer on Only Murders. And you can see that same aesthetic.
oh, interesting.
And
Oh, that yeah, I could see that definitely. Um,
uh,
do you like the movie? Because I know a lot of
we
people, they write a book and then they make it in a movie. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't. They change so much.
we were really dispassionate about the process because we do collaborate and we know that there are so many ways to tell a story and we've been hired to adapt other people's books. So I will say that we loved the shooting script. So the version that Sherry Berman and Robert Pulcini wanted to film, that Scarlett signed on for and everyone else signed on for, was brilliant. And you can see that in the opening sequence where it's the dioramas from the Natural History Museum, and there's a woman in a Chanel suit vomiting into a toilet. Like this was a brilliant skating satire, no holds barred. And then because Harvey was in his death spiral, he kept cutting it and cutting it and cutting it. And at the last minute, he also pushed the release date by 3 months. So it came out to nothing. All of the publicity, Scarlett
Uh,
did SNL in May. There were supposed to be Windows of Bloomingdale's coast to coast, a makeup collaboration.
so it was supposed to
All
come
of
out.
that stuff got packed up and sent to Nigeria.
It was going to come out in the summer, and they pushed it off to like the middle. Uh,
September. And so there was nothing. There was no
oh, that
premiere.
yeah, that's a crappy
The
time.
actors were like done with him at that point. He alienated everybody. So Emma and I again, like we were just stuck in the trunk. We couldn't change anything. No one would really talk to us, but we could sense that things were not going as planned.
Right. Because I do remember when it came out, I think I kind of noticed that it was sort of like, oh, like this seems like it should have a lot more fanfare than it's
Yeah.
getting.
It was supposed to get the same rollout that Devil Wears Prada got. And miraculously, we ended up meeting with this incredible woman named Pamela Hennings a few years later, who was in charge of the whole rollout. And she came and met with us and she gave us an umbrella with everyone's signatures on it. She's like, this was going to be in the window of Bloomingdale's coast to coast. And she gave us some of the makeup and everything. She said, I've been hoping for years I was going to get to meet you and tell you everything that I had lined up to promote your movie because I had to throw it all in the garbage. And I am
Uh,
sorry.
wow.
But I still have the umbrella. So it was like we were in a cloud of mystery, but then over the years, the universe conspired to give us answers. We became friends with Bob and Sherry on the strike line. And if we hadn't been in the WGA, we never would have walked with them in the rain for days and days, and we wouldn't have gotten to hear the whole
Uh,
behind the scenes
Wait, were
story.
they the
So,
ones? Did they do American Splendor?
yes, yes.
Okay.
oh, is that the Giamatti connection then? Because
Yes,
yeah.
and they just directed a great episode of Only Murders, which is the Matteo Borghese connection. So,
Oh,
nice.
okay. Um, so did you must have been happy when had American Splendor already come out before the Nanny
Yes,
Diaries? So were you
yes,
guys,
a
I
couple of
mean,
years before.
you must have been, were you kind of happy that They were because they
Oh,
seemed kind of to have like a vibe of like almost like kind of indie-ish, and they seemed a lot more creative and artistic than maybe other directors. Like if what's this, like Mick G was going to direct it or something. I don't know if you know
we
who
were
that
very
is.
excited. Yeah, we thought that we loved their sensibility, and I think to this day, I just wish that they could have been able to get exactly their vision onto the screen.
Right, right.
So were there a lot
Well,
of
from what
changes from the book to the movie? Were there a lot of changes or no?
Yes, there are a lot of changes. Changes are fine.
Yeah.
They got rid of the grandmother. They made her more working class, which is totally fine. It makes sense for the audience. They
I heard in the book all the
best friend,
characters in the book all the characters are black and then they made it white for the movie. It's that's pretty
which was
rough.
weird. It was a weird choice.
Yeah,
Fair.
sometimes they do that.
Yeah.
But there's still
I'm
time to
joking,
reboot it.
everybody.
Were you was it I know you like the casting for the most part, what but was there any like for Grayer, was it kind of like what you had envisioned, or was it was that good casting, did you think? Because I feel like it can be
Oh,
dicey with children,
Yeah. I
casting
mean,
children
yeah,
sometimes.
but it's a great cast
he
you got
was
here.
great. Oh my gosh, he was so cute. And it's challenging. Of course, you have to age the character up, but also typically, I think he was like 6 or 7, playing 5. You should have seen him at the cast party. He was like last person on the dance floor, bringing his A game. He was terrific. And Chris
Nice.
Evans is just the nicest, nicest person. Strong's the nicest person.
Oh,
I mean,
Chris
he was just
Evans,
a
right? He plays
Right.
HH, right?
yes,
He was the
yes.
hottie. He's the
The
hottie.
Harvard
He's the
hottie.
hottie.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see. Wait, so who's the kid? I don't maybe I don't know. Oh,
The actor.
yeah, who's the actor? Played the kid.
Is he
I'm
still did
blanking on
he
his name. I want to say his name was also Nikki.
Yeah, I'm looking it up. Let's see.
um
Was the character's name again?
Grayer?
Greer.
Great. Can I find? Wow.
Well, I just
Oh,
want
here it is.
so
Okay.
who was it?
Nicholas Art. Nicholas
Nikki.
Reed.
Okay, I was not wrong.
Yeah.
Um, I looked him up. Apparently, he's addicted to crack now, so that's too bad. Sorry. No, I'm sure he's fine. um, so after all that, what's it like when they're like, okay, next one, let's have another one. So like when obviously I guess you guys had a like a deal to do two more or something, and or was that not?
No, we just sold the one book. And so we came to them with our second idea, which was a girl who is hired to be the face of a feminist website that eventually becomes a porn site. And
Ooh, that's good.
Oh,
St.
that's Citizen
Martin's,
Girl.
yeah, St. Martin's did not want it. So we ended up at Random House for a time, and then the person who'd acquired it at Random House left. So then we left as well, and we ended up at Atria, which is part of Simon and Schuster, and we were there for I think 5 more books.
And why do
We
you?
were there
So
What
for
did?
wait, that after that first book was a big hit and they didn't want the second one, that seems
How
strange.
does that? I feel like I read that too when that
Yeah.
happened. So what was their reasoning?
they wanted a Nanny sequel. And we were very
Oh,
clear at that point. Like, Nanny's not nannying again. They're like, no, she goes to Chicago. Like, they just wanted the exact same book. They saw a series. They just, I get it. It was the conservative choice, but
yeah.
we were already excited about doing the next thing.
Interesting. Um, and then when you finally did this kind of the sequel, Nanny Returns, was that how did that come about? Was that just something that were people pushing that on you, or were you guys just kind of like, what, let's delve into this again?
It had been enough years later that what we had both started to witness was that whereas when I had gone to Chapin and your sister went to Chapin, parents were afraid of the schools. The schools were in charge. And now, post Giuliani, and with the amount of wealth in the city, the schools just became the next level of employee. When you're paying 55, 65,000 plus you're making maybe a six-figure donation and your kid gets a B plus, you now call the teacher in on the rug and say, excuse me. And so that really interested us. And we came up with what we thought was a fantastical premise, the idea of a really fancy school opening in the meatpacking district with Chuck Close paintings in the
Huh.
cafeteria and uniforms by Agnes B. And people like, that's so far fetched. And I think Avenues opened maybe a month after the book came out.
Hmm.
It
So
got really hard to write satire because the world is satire
That's
now.
yeah, that's so when one thing I wanted to ask too is like once you did your follow-up, your next book, was there kind of like were you kind of anticipating maybe like sort of a backlash a little bit because maybe it's like you have such a big hit and then people are like, okay, well let's see, obviously there's pressure on and people are kind of like, let's see what this one is. And what was that like and how was it received? Your next one.
Oh, yes, some of the reviews were scathing. What I think we didn't anticipate is that every person who had interviewed us for Nanny Diaries, most of those journalists are also aspiring novelists. And
Oh.
so there was always this moment where they're like, so how old are you? So do you have an MFA? Because I have two novels I haven't been able to sell. We're sorry. So we just left ourselves open for people to be able to process their feelings about all of that through our work. And it hurts. All these years later, I can tell you it's one of our books that continues to sell. And gosh, maybe 10 years ago now, we met a woman at an event and she said, I read Citizen Girl in college and now I work for the FBI and I work in human trafficking because of your book. We're like, that's it. That's all we needed to ever do. So we stand by it, but I think it sold really well. But I think it would have sold at the level of Nanny had we had the wind at our backs again, had the media embraced it instead of shitting all over it. But you know what? That's their prerogative. That's fine.
I feel like it's an unwinnable situation when something like that
Mm-hmm.
happens, when you have that much, scrutiny and you get that much attention and accolades. I just feel like the next one, they're all just kind of ramping up they're kind of like looking for anything to attack. So,
And I think it was a stream that the book is about the failures of third wave feminism. And either that was something that you were really excited to read about. And I think that's why we had a younger readership, like women who were in college. And I think older women, they wanted another fun book with a kid in it. And it just wasn't
yeah,
that.
right. Um, and when Nanny Returns came out, what was that experience like? Was that received the way you expected, or was it
Yes, I think people were so happy to see the characters again and to reconnect with them and find out what had happened. There's a very ardent group of people who on what was Twitter now X, who, because of the Scarlet Chris MCU
mhm.
Oh.
factor, they really want Nanny Returns to be made into a movie because they just want more Scarlet and Chris. I'm like, I am powerless to make this happen, powerless, but thank you. I'm glad that this story has resonated
And
with you so
that's
deeply.
never
It's
been
very
that
sweet.
that was never something that was brought. No one ever approached you guys about that.
That book is not commercial in terms of adaptation. Like it's a great novel, but it's not the kind of story where like, oh yes, this would make woman takes down private school. Like it's just no.
Yeah.
Well, maybe they
Maybe
turn
if
her into a
like
superhero.
Alexander Payne wanted to make it,
Yeah. Maybe they turn her into
Well,
a superhero nanny. They would just combine it.
right? I would
oh,
watch
I'm
that.
I'm sure you guys should write that next. I'm sure
Yeah.
that would be made into a movie immediately. Just do like Captain America and the Nanny Diaries.
That's
Super
right. Yeah,
Nanny.
yeah, you
Yeah,
had Captain
totally.
America. You had Captain America in there, right? You
Yeah.
did.
We did have
Yeah,
Captain America.
yeah, and you had yeah. Wow.
And so I know that you have a book coming out, and is this your first book you're releasing that you didn't collaborate with Emma on?
Yes.
And what is
It,
is that what was that like not writing with her? Was it like a whole new you had to adapt to a whole new way of writing? Is a lot more difficult because you're just completely alone and you can't really have anyone to bounce anything off of?
it's terrible. It took me forever.
How
It
long did
was
it
much
take you?
harder. 8 years.
What is
I mean, there
your
was a pandemic, but 8 years.
what is your experience with writing? do you like it, or is it because I write too, and it's I find it very difficult and frustrating, and it's very hard for me to be disciplined about it. Do you do you sit down every day at a certain time and do a certain amount of writing, or
I wish I could remember who said nobody likes writing, everyone likes having written. And I do think that there is some truth to that, maybe with the exception of
I
Stephen
think it was
King.
Harvey Weinstein said that.
Yeah. Stephen King is
Sounds
one.
like
Into
it.
a plant.
Stephen King's like insane. He has like these books all the time. He's writing them. Then I'm on his X page, Twitter page. He's always like, I'm like, when does
Mhm.
this guy sleep? I don't understand it.
I, he is superhuman.
Well,
Yeah.
he's one of those. He says, I think what it is that his approach to writing, um, is I heard him in an interview. He says like, well, I write 10 pages a day every day, and so that ends up being a book every like few months. So I literally think that's how he looks at. He's one of those people that just every day he goes and he writes 10 pages no matter what. So
Oh, you're right. Because
I'm
that
one
would
of
be
those people
like,
where
yeah.
I get very like, okay, I hear that, I'm like, I'm gonna write 10 pages every day, and then in 3 days I'm like, okay, I don't know what I want to write right now. So do you have
Yeah.
that ever? What did you have any procrastination about it, or
I will tell you, since none of us are Stephen King and I teach writing, I always say to people, pick the lightest lift that you can do consistently. So, because I'm also working on a lot of nonfiction every day, I will do maybe 500 words as my daily goal to get a first draft done. But in 7 months, I'll have one. And that doesn't even include writing on weekends. So pick the thing that you realistically really have the time and the capacity to do. And after 30 minutes, you might be like, and my brain just turned off, and I need to move on to doing the thing that pays. That's totally fine. What's miraculous about Stephen King is that he writes 10 good pages. I mean, anyone can write 10 pages. I have people who send me 10 pages all the time. They're like, these are terrible. So only go as long as you are fully engaged, and also know it's just like exercise or anything else. Like, you will gradually build up the capacity over time. But if you try to go and like bench 170 right off the bat, you're going to hurt yourself.
yeah? What would you took classes, you took writing classes, right?
One,
So do you think how did you learn to write? Did you just kind of do it learn by doing it, or did you just read a lot? Or because that's the thing I kind of have always grappled with writing. It's so difficult. And the whole thing of like, oh, this is good writing, oh, and this is bad writing. I feel like it's very hard a lot of times to differentiate or to pinpoint why it's not good. So what would you say? How
you
did you
know it when
figure?
you
Was
see
there a
it.
time where you were like, okay, this is good? You could tell what you were written was good or not?
I think it's Tony Kushner in the documentary about him wrestling with angels, where he says every day you have the vision of what you want to do. I'm holding my hand up here by the top of my head. And then you have your talent, and I'm holding my hand by my chin. And every day you're just trying to close that gap. And on the good days, you close it. On the bad days, you don't get the two things anywhere near each other. I have always been a voracious reader, the parents with the books.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I did start writing when I was little. Like, I wrote poems. I just recently was clearing out the basement and found a whole bunch of short stories that I'd written in first grade. I just loved to write, even if I didn't think I would do it professionally. It was just my primary channel of expression. And I find now that I'm also working with CEOs and professors on their books. I also like nonfiction. I like researching. I like the homework assignment aspect of it as well. So I'm always sitting here in this chair Monday through Friday from like 8 to 6, but I'm not always working on my creative projects. You just primarily also because I'm running a household and
Yeah.
inflation.
Well, that it's also hard being in front of a computer to write because that's also where the internet is. So I get very like, I'm like, well, let me Google myself.
um,
I have learned a lot recently about cues. So you may want to have another device, even if it's just like a used Google, whatever. What are those called?
Like
Oh
The
my gosh, my
iPads?
daughter has one, but the Google one. Like you can get them on Amazon for like $150. Like you might just want to have a second thing that is only your creative work and that you do it like on your bed or on the couch.
Right.
Like so that you have one space where you're doing one thing and then a different space to do the other thing, and your brain will actually respond to those cues.
I thought you still use a typewriter, Tom, right? Like the old school.
I actually, well, I don't know. I don't even know how people wrote back then. That's like insane to me.
Especially
I
now with it.
don't either. I think about that all the time.
If you
The
made a
typewriter
mistake,
people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy to me. I mean, I find it so hard, difficult when they make everything so easy for you to
Yeah,
write.
just the
It's
automatic
still so
spell check.
difficult.
You don't even know how to spell. You don't even know how to spell anymore. It just fix everything for you. You know. We're,
Did you ever do this? Did you ever like actually just write out things you were writing, like just with a pen, like write into a notebook? Did you ever find that like an easier way to write? Because I found that sometimes that helps me if I like it's kind of like taking away a step, that it's like a less like I'm not like as removed from it if I'm just writing with a pen, and then it's kind of like it kind of spills out of me that way. Have you ever done that? Or
I have to admit, I have not written longhand since I got my first iMac in 2000.
oh,
I
okay.
stopped. Like I
um
never, I mean, I have so much paper everywhere. My whole desk is covered in paper. So I make all my notes on paper, but I don't, that's my organizational space
what do you
rather than a
do have you
creative
have what
space.
do you do if you how do you handle like writer's block or experience that? What's that like?
I don't have writer's block because I just move on to the next thing. Like if this scene suddenly just disappeared or also hangs up on me, then I'll just dial someone else. Jump ahead, jump ahead. If you have a vision of how you think the book ends, write that. If you have a scene and you don't even know where it's going to go yet, write that thing. Like write yourself back into the story.
When you're writing, do you ever have the experience of, because I know a lot of creative people can have a lot of self-doubt, but do you experience when you're writing, I know you've been doing it for so long, but maybe early on were you like, this is bad, like when you're in the process of writing it, is that like a normal experience for writers to have?
Yes, if you have no self doubt, you're a sociopath. Tony Kushner, who I just mentioned, every single creative person is plagued with self doubt. And if you want to feel better, watch documentaries about your favorite creative people. And you will see people who are just beating their heads against their desks or their pianos, their guitars. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's humbling. It should be humbling. It should be hard. I guess, except for Elton John. It's not hard for Elton John.
Also, Donald
No Stephen
Trump,
King can get summer place,
Donald Trump thinks he's a really good writer, so
Yeah.
that's a
right?
sociopath
That's
thing.
my point.
He wrote Art of
Yes.
the. I'm sure he wrote Art of the Deal, except for the guy who actually did write it.
Yeah. um
It must have been a terrible gig.
I can imagine.
I'll let you go in a little bit. I'm just very so with the Julia Roberts did the audiobook for you guys.
Yes.
um how did that come to be? That was that kind of another surreal moment of, was she just a fan of the book?
It was absolutely extraordinary to be linked to that woman in my lifetime in any way. Her younger sister, Lisa, was my mother's best friend's nanny.
Oh,
So
okay.
Wow.
Claire offered to pass the book to Lisa, who long before it came out, who passed it to Julia, who said she would read the audiobook. And trying to get the audiobook publisher to use her was a lot more challenging than you would imagine because Julia was
Why?
in she was in New Mexico, I believe, shooting a movie, and the studio was in New York.
Oh.
So that was just a non-starter for them. We're like, hey, how about you take a recording device and get on a plane to where Julia is
Yeah.
Right.
and record it wherever she wants to record it.
Yeah, they're like, no, they don't have any recording devices in New Mexico.
It was like we had to keep that on track with every fiber of our
I
being.
mean, that's like another insane story. Like you would never think that, like when I heard about Julia Roberts doing the audio, but you've just been like, okay, well, they would obviously accommodate that and make that happen anyway. So just
Mm.
it's amazing. And you probably
I
were
also have
exasperated along the way a lot too.
I have a stupid question with the audiobooks. Do they read the entire book or do they cut some stuff out?
That is an excellent question.
Yeah, one from.
So back in the day, the version she read is abridged. There is now an
Oh yeah,
unabridged
Brit.
version also available. At the time, the prevailing wisdom was that people only wanted to listen to 5 or 6 hours of something. Also, I think because they were on CD, the CDs were expensive. So the
Uh,
longer the book was, the more they had to charge for it. Now, because it's all digital, everything's unabridged. Like the idea that you would abridge a book
oh
is an
really?
anathema to people who want to listen to them.
Yeah. Was that a
Yeah, like
surreal
Wolf Hall is
experience?
like 32 hours.
That I mean, that must have been a surreal experience listening to Julia Roberts saying your words.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was insane. I mean, again, just a complete out of body experience. And we sent her a copy of what we thought was her favorite book at the time as a thank you. Wally Land's I Know This Much Is True. And then I got to meet Wally Land. Say, do you know that Julia Roberts loves your book? Because we sent her a signed first edition. Like, I did not know that. So he
Did
was
you ever get to
thrilled.
meet her in that process?
No, we never did.
Oh
Someday.
wow. That's so crazy. I just assumed you guys would all just be hanging out all the time.
And I
No,
think
see,
yeah.
that's the whole thing. You're successful, but you still just have to like declog your garbage disposal. It's just life.
And I think like
Uh,
doing a reading of these audiobooks, I mean, it's very time consuming. I mean, so it's pretty impressive that she would do that. How long would that would take to record that? Because you're making mistakes too, right? That you have to correct.
We ended up recording Citizen Girl, and the book that had been recorded right before us was Sean Penn reading Bob Dylan's memoir.
Oh, God.
And they'd let Sean Penn smoke in the booth for the whole recording session. So I can tell you, we were in that booth for 3 straight days for yeah, probably like 12-hour recording.
Oh,
um, I'll let you go, but I because you teach writing now, what you said, a lot of times people, will write 10 pages and they'll send it to you and it'll be not very good. What is a common mistake you see people make, writers, that they will send you stuff, and what is just a common what is the common mistake that a lot of maybe newer writers make? They try to say too much or something.
So I think the wisdom of every aspect of the creative process exists in the Jungian paradox. So just know everything I'm going to tell you, I'm then going to immediately contradict. But I think for writing to be really successful, it has to be an act of empathy. And by successful, I mean it resonates with even one person. You have to keep, at some point in the process, front of mind, what does this reader need from this story? Are they even understanding that it's December or that it's raining or that this character is sad? Because I think oftentimes writers, especially first time writers, will get so lost in their own idea of what the material is that they've lost all perspective, that they might not have conveyed any of that on the page.
Really?
And so, usually with clients, the very first thing I'll ask them is, who are you writing for? And that question will often stump them. But I think until you've gotten really clear about who you're talking to and why you're talking to them and what they're going to get out of listening to you can have the most beautiful creative experience. And I say anyone can go off, and this is where I contradict myself, and they should write what is fullest within themselves. But if they want to sell the book, at some point they have to put on that objective lens and get really critical with the material.
Who are some of your favorite authors, or do you offhand?
Um, Elizabeth Strout, she wrote the Olive Kittredge books and the Lucy books. I am
yeah.
just completely obsessed with her.
Oh, okay.
She's an extraordinary Pulitzer Prize winning novelist, and her stories are so deceptively simple and exquisite that they're just rocket science. Anne Patchett, everyone loves Anne Patchett. She's a phenomenal writer. I think if I was on a desert island and I only had books by those two women, I still would be very happy for the rest of my life.
And are there any, really big celebrated writers that you just think are like just
Crap.
not very good? What? Crap,
No,
yeah.
I will just say that this summer I had a string of buying books I was really excited to read, and one after the other was just terrible. I was really disappointed. That really rarely happens to me, but it was stunning. I don't know if it's a result of the contractions in the industry. I do know that that is a real factor for everyone I work with, where editors aren't able to edit anymore. They can only facilitate. And
Oh.
whether for some of their high profile authors, they think, oh, I don't need to worry about this book. That person's got it. They know what they're doing. And the next thing you know, there's something on the shelf. This is terrible. How did no one tap this person on the shoulder?
Right.
So I won't name names, but
But I have actually,
yeah,
Okay.
I
not
actually have one.
everything is a winner.
I have one question to ask you because it's kind of in the news, and you could wear it as a badge of honor. A lot of these places, libraries are banning books. Have you had any of your books
Mhm.
banned anywhere? Because it's almost a badge of honor because they're banning everything, really.
That is an excellent question. I don't know if any of our books have been banned. I do know that three of our titles were used to train AI, so we're part of that lawsuit,
Oh boy.
which is good company to be in. But banning, I mean, we, as the three of us sit here, I mean, dear God, really? Really? We're going by that, like 1936 playbook.
Well, you've been hearing
It's
those stories where like they're banning like this for no reason some of these books because they mention sex once. It's usually in the South or something like that. I was just curious if that ever
Yeah.
happened to you.
And no, it's insane. It's insane that we're banning books and we have no bans on guns.
Yeah.
What? I
Right,
mean,
right.
also, aren't we so lucky that anyone actually goes to a library anymore? Libraries are so underfunded. If a kid goes to a library and finds a book, isn't that the most miraculous thing that ever happened? The idea that you would be restricting ideas when all these kids also have unfettered access to cell phones
Yeah, I
and
know.
God knows what they're pulling up. I
Uh,
mean, it is absurd.
Yeah.
That's why we don't write satire anymore. You can't satirize that.
Yeah. What is the what is the state of the publishing industry now? I know it's kind of gone through a lot of changes in I don't know, last decade or so. Is it just not, I always hear, not as many people are reading as they were. Um, what is it in your experience now? Is it like
Well, the good news is people are reading. So book sales steadily climb and readers are readers. Every few years, publishing announces that there are no more readers. And what the last few years of disruption with the pandemic and with the advent of the Kindle and digital reading, each time they think that this is going to be the end, it just isn't. Kindle sales spiked for a year or two because people were excited by the novelty, and then they dropped, and people went right back to buying physical books. Even my daughter, who's a voracious reader, and I offered her a Kindle so she could just buy her crap by the bushel. And she said, Mom, it's my paper time. It's my screen free time. I was like, fine, whatever. Then I'll
oh,
spend all the money on the books. It's fine.
that's interesting.
So, so that's all well and good and wonderful. But the publishing companies themselves have consolidated to streamline overhead, and the physical cost of producing a book since the pandemic is higher than it's ever been.
Mm,
So that does mean that it's harder to sell a book than it has been in.
right?
And so agents are really discerning about what they'll take on. And books, I had a client come to me last week with just exquisite experimental fiction, the kind of thing that 20 years ago we could have easily found her a smaller independent press who would have been thrilled to publish it because it was just gorgeous. And now I said, I think you're going to have to self publish this. I don't know who can afford to print this anymore. So it's a bummer on that front, but the good news is people are still reading.
that's
Yeah.
good.
And are you when does your next book come out? Next year?
May 5th. So I have a nice long lead time, which will evaporate and then I'll be panicked.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming
Yeah,
on.
it was
This has
great.
been really exciting.
You
I
asked great questions.
Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. I just want to tell you, so when the reason I first knew about the Nanny Diaries was I was working as a nanny when it came out. And so me and Eric were like stand-up comics. That's how we know each other. And so I was doing comedy in the city when, and I was nannying to make money. And a relative of mine knew that and sent me the Nanny Diaries. And I was like, oh,
Oh.
okay. And so that's, I read it when it first came out. And it actually inspired me. I wrote a draft of a book called The Manny Diaries, which was about my experience as being a male nanny. So it was kind of like, that kind of was the impetus of me kind of writing my first foray into trying to write something.
Yeah.
And there was a book called The Manny.
There was a book called The Manny that came out a little bit after that was more about some the Manny having an affair with the mother or
Yes,
something. Did you read
Oh.
that?
I did not, but I'm sure it was sent to us for a blurb.
But I do remember that when I was finishing it, I was in the comedy scene, and a lot of, the whole thing in comedy was like, they were like, you have to come up with like, your sitcom idea. And then so when I was talking about writing the Manny Diaries, everyone's like, oh, that's like perfect. Like, that's your thing. And so I, at the time, I was sending it out to some, agents and stuff. And I think the idea intrigued them because your book had just come out. But it was so difficult to get anyone to actually represent me for it. You know what I mean? So, and then when I was really pushing it, I think that's when publishing was like shifting a little bit. So, but it was like an interesting, but recently I just kind of have gone back to it and looked at it. So it's, it inspired me.
Right.
It,
Or
it's
she
a
might, or
perennially popular idea.
yeah, or she might sue you. She could sue you at this point.
Yeah. Um,
This was so delightful. Thank you so much.
yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it was
And
great.
the name of your book coming out is The Best We Could Hope For. And thanks a lot for coming on. Nicola Kraus.
Nicola,
I said it
it's
right,
Nikki
right?
to you. We're friends now.
Oh, Nikki. Do people call you Nikki? That's a lot easier.
It's a lot easier.
Okay.
All
Well, thanks
right.
for listening, everybody. And thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I'll pick up your book when it comes out.
Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you. Have a great night.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Bye.
Okay. Bye
Bye.
bye.